Welcome to today's episode, everyone. We've got a very exciting guest for you guys. For those of you just joining the podcast, we're E.N.G Media, and we specialize in helping software and technology companies scale their revenue. So if you want to learn more how to take your software or tech business to the next level, make sure to stick around. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop us the word growth in the DMs. But without further ado, Noel, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. I'm really excited to dive into everything that Data Coves is doing and a little bit about all the awesome projects that you guys are working on. So really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So maybe we can just start by you telling us a little bit about Data Coves and kind of what the role or like what you do in the day to day, I guess.
Yeah. So Data Coves offers a managed analytics platform. We take several open source components that we've built, put it all together, and run it in a way that's scalable. We have it in both SaaS and private cloud deployments.
Nice.
And it all came about from my experience working in and with large enterprises and seeing how difficult it was to set up and manage these platforms. So we essentially wanted to simplify that and not only the tooling, but also the best practices that go along with using those tools.
100%. I know, especially last time that we had chatted, we were looking at it because I was explaining, my experience working with several CRMs during my corporate experience, working with e-commerce companies. And a lot of the times it seems like, we set up these softwares and we set up like these data operation platforms, and you kind of forget where certain things are as you look to scale, or maybe, and then that causes like a lot of migrations or just data to be lost, or people in a different role trying to complete a project and create more efficiency in their systems, and they're not really able to do it because everything is essentially siloed or disorganized. And so it really sounds like what you guys do is work with these enterprises to essentially start fresh or maybe migrate to a new platform. I think you mentioned that you guys
Mhm.
have a software as well as like a managed service as well to help them. And when you mention enterprises, do you guys work with any specific, I guess, industry, or really just any enterprise that needs this software?
Yeah, so I have a history in life sciences. So we have several life science companies, but we have people in financial sector, retail, even manufacturing. So we don't specialize. All of our customers are in the US and Europe. Um, and most people are not starting fresh.
Uh-huh.
They already have something. I mean, especially if you're in a large enterprise, been doing analytics for a long time, but you have those issues that you mentioned with the siloed. Uh, and it isn't just siloed data, but also siloed teams, different teams doing different things across, even if they're related. So you may have like external consultants, you may have different IT groups working with business stakeholders who then work with somebody else, or
Yeah.
you're working at the regional level and then at the country level. So there's a bunch of places where processes tend to kind of break down, and that's part of the thing that we're solving for. And it is a combination of tooling and process. So we always emphasize that.
Absolutely. And I think the term that you used kind of last time that we spoke was technical debt. Like these enterprises build up a lot of technical debt within their softwares and within their platforms. And so essentially that's where you guys come in, right? Like to essentially eliminate that technical debt as much as possible and build them out a system where they're able to scale. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think nobody sets out to build technical debt. I think what happens is as you are growing, so think about a small organization, you start out doing analytics and you need to answer certain questions. So you may go right into that tool that you're using. Maybe it's Google Analytics or your CRM, and they may have some sort of dashboards.
Yeah.
Um, and that works for up to a point. And then you say, okay, well, we need to do something more complex. So let's extract that data. Let's put it into Excel. Let's do VLOOKUPs and somehow connect these different pieces of data and produce some charts. It works, but it's manual. And then
Right.
you go to the next level and you say like, okay, let's automate some of this stuff. And there's a point where even actually even at the Excel level, you may have different people doing a bunch of different Excels, and so now you have a bunch of files all over the place, or it could be Google Sheets. Um, certain people who build it know it well, but other people don't know it. You don't know, especially if you're dealing with, like files in OneDrive, what is the right version of this file or something like that.
Right.
So it creates a bunch of different problems, maintainability and scaling and all that. And then as the organization grows, then you have more specialized teams. So
Mhm.
there'll be a team that says, we are the only ones who sort of manage the database. We are the only ones who can ingest data. And that tends to happen because it's a more complex endeavor, let's say.
Sure.
And you may want to have certain restrictions as far as governance policies, security access to the data, and all of that. Um, but there'll be just a team who just loads data. Then there'll be another team who works to figure out how to transform the data in a way that's more user friendly to the business. And
Uh-huh.
then there'd be another team who works on visualizing that data, so creating, the charts and so you end up building a bunch of specialized skills for different people, and at the end of the day, all of that causes delays. So
Right.
every time you're interfacing with someone else, you have a communication issue, you have a delay issue. And so as the organization gets bigger and bigger, you also have issues where like, okay, well, I'm serving the region.
Sure.
And so if I'm serving the region, then I'm something that a country may need, like let's say France wants something, then they're not the top of the list. And so then France says, well, I'll just do my own thing. And so then they make their own silos. So like over time, things, in in trying to get more efficient at delivery, you
Yeah.
end up creating these silos. And because there are no standards, there is no governance. That's what sort of leads to that technical debt where we started. So technical debt is just I'm doing something quickly that that I have to pay for later. So if I didn't name a table following some naming convention, then it's super hard to find these things. And over time, you're like, okay, I have this giant mess, and I have to clean it up. And so that's the technical debt that you're paying for.
100%. No, I appreciate you sharing those insights. And, I think a big problem, or what maybe some of these enterprises or larger companies see, is they feel like it's high risk maybe to switch platforms, like where they're housing all of their data. I know I mentioned my experience in the financial services industry, and I worked for a fairly large company. I won't call them out by name, but
Mhm.
what we kind of talked about was that a lot of the systems that they were using for processing loans for different things, they were a bank, were really kind of outdated and traditional. And I had mentioned to you, I'm thinking maybe they've tried to move to newer platforms as well, and it almost seemed like there was always just like a high risk, or they didn't see the value in being able to shift into a new platform. So I know, like, with everything that you guys are doing at Data Coves, a lot of what you do is low maintenance, and like the migration time isn't it's not really a huge long process. I think on your website it's mentioned that it could take anywhere from a couple days to 6 weeks altogether, which in the grand scheme of things is a really short amount of time, right?
Yeah, to be clear, that's to get the process going, to set up those standards and all of that. A migration at a large enterprise may it can take months or a
Mm.
year or something like that. So I'm not necessarily claiming that we will move everything over,
Uh-huh.
but part of this is establishing that solid foundation. So we can do that in as little as 6 weeks and just say like, okay, this is what the new world will look like. This is how we will secure the data. This is how we will structure things, how we will name things, and just give people a sense of how that governance is all going to work. How do one of the things that we do is we try to improve collaboration by having everybody collaborate in the same platform, in the same code base. So
Mm.
I talk to people about, large open source projects. If you think about it, we've probably all heard of Linux. It runs Android or whatever. There's all of these operating systems and tools out there. Well, most of these open source projects are developed by people who are remote. They're all over the place, and there can be thousands of people collaborating.
Yeah.
How do you do that if you just let anybody do anything? That wouldn't work. So what typically happens is you have a core team who defines the governance, who defines what goes in and what doesn't, and all of that. Anybody can contribute,
Uh-huh.
but just because I contribute doesn't mean it necessarily makes it into the operating system. And so That's how we look at data. How do we make it reliable? And how do we allow anybody in the organization to collaborate
Hmm.
by establishing these strong governance, automations, and all of that kind of stuff to help people? Because sometimes people just they don't know any better. I think part of that risk averse that you were talking about, I've seen that varies by industry. So if you're talking to a, some kind of tech company, they tend to be, a younger company. They want to try new things. And but when you're dealing with patients, if you're dealing, life sciences, if you're dealing with money in financial sectors and things like that, then you tend to be more conservative and more risk averse.
Sure.
And so what we try to explain to people is that, it's without risk, there's no reward, right? You end up wanting to do something better, but you're back exactly where you started, and so it isn't transformational. A lot of the times, people will just focus on the tooling,
Hmm.
not changing the process, not changing how people work, and it's not necessarily that much better. And in some cases, it's even worse than what they had before.
Sure. 100%. No, I think that that's really something that differentiates Data Coves is really that you're not just selling tools to somebody. I think we talked about that, last time as well, that a lot of maybe, platform providers will kind of sell a cookie cutter formula to an enterprise, whereas maybe that's not something that they need, or they don't actually try to dial in the processes related to the system that they're actually selling. Do you see a lot of maybe similar companies to Data Coves kind of making that mistake? And is that really how you guys are setting yourself apart?
I think in general, I mean, I don't come from sales
Hmm.
or marketing background or something like that. So my approach was different from the beginning. We didn't set out to have like the Olive Garden, huge company with many locations or something like that. I'm okay having a good Italian restaurant, right? So I'd rather have a Michelin five-star restaurant than the Olive Garden. And so when you take that approach and when you don't have investors to answer to and all of that kind of stuff, then you have the luxury of taking a different approach.
Right.
And so part of that approach is to care about what we do, to care about the success of our customers and how they're doing things.
Yeah.
And this is the same as any other kind of transaction that you may deal with in the world. You may be buying a house and you'll have a salesperson who you know feels like they're going to be your friend and all of that. And once the house is sold, they're out of there, right? They're moving on to the next sale. And so we look at it differently. We're like, okay, well, we agreed that this was the right house for you.
Mhm.
Let's make it a reality. So by that I mean, you may need to do some remodeling. Here's some people that'll help you do remodeling. And you need some design ideas. Here's some other people that can help you with that. And really make that your own, because you will find that many people out there, many software vendors are focused on just the sale and selling you the dream. This is going to be the house of your dreams. This is going to do everything that you wanted.
Right.
But then after that, it's like it's left up to you, and you're like, okay, where do I even start? I don't even know how to move here, right? Just think about that. Like you're moving from one house to the other.
Right.
What movers? It's a new city, there's a bunch of different things, and I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but the point is that there's a lot of steps that you need to figure out,
Yeah.
and the simpler that you make that for somebody, the easier it is for them to do that migration and to make the platform do what they're expecting, or what they were sold as sort of in that dream.
100%. And I think that's important because it sounds like, you guys are solving a really complex solution. So you don't really take on the role of a service provider. It sounds like to me, you guys are more of like a long-term partnership, taking more of like a holistic view over the whole entire process. And I think that that's really important, especially for results. But I imagine you build solid relationships with your client base doing that as well.
Yeah, we've definitely, we have people who will, uh, go above and beyond whenever I ask them for something, because they see that, they see it's not a transactional thing, that
Right.
if they need something, we'll do it. Well, they'll call us and they're like, oh, what do you think about this? And okay, I'm selling you a software, but I'm going to give you my advice. Have a look at this, check that out, and so they do see it as a partner. I've had people who even said like,
Oh,
um, I was skeptical in the very beginning, because they've been through this dog and pony show before, where
right.
people have sold and stuff, and in the end, it did what they were promised. Like, I can go to sleep at night. I don't have to worry about this stuff because the automation takes care of it. And,
Yeah,
these are people where, you have over 100 collaborators in one big platform. And so it is possible to do, but it is a different approach.
sure, 100%. So it sounds to me like your guys' business model deals mainly with, working with, I guess, larger enterprises. Would you say that that's right?
We have both large and small. I think what unifies them is it is working with people who who have been around the block before. So
Mm,
people who have been dealing with data, who have seen, things not go the way that they were expecting, and they're open to trying something else. Essentially, they've been sold a bill of goods over time, and they're like, okay, I know that what most people are saying isn't real.
mm.
What you're saying, we don't just say it. I tell people anybody can show you a slide. I can actually show you the reality of that slide.
Right,
And so that's very different. And so, yeah, so it is a different approach. We are selling a platform. Our primary revenue is licensing, but we'll do certain projects where um, we will just set up an MVP, end to end, brand new project and everything, just to show everybody this is how it's all going to work in the end. So it isn't just a dream. Here's the reality.
right. Yeah, I assume it's very time intensive, but it all kind of fits into, I guess, your business model. And I think it's hard too, especially right now, to find companies that aren't just white labeling maybe another platform or another software to you, and they make it seem like it's a one-on-one partnership experience because they come from a sales and marketing background, but in reality, like you said, it's just transactional, and then you end up back where you started, and it's just a complete waste of time and money. So it's
Yeah.
unfortunate that that's how it is now, right? But
You will find sometimes that, we're pretty upfront. We'll tell you like, here's exactly how this works. There's no, smoke and mirrors. We are using these tools, and
yeah,
we're putting it together, and we're simplifying it. And in the end, it is your code. You don't have to. There's no vendor lock-in or anything like that with Data Coves.
yeah,
But other people will take existing tooling, repackage it, give it a new brand, and now it's like, I'm selling you one thing.
mm,
And it's not one thing, but to the layperson, it may appear like it's one thing. It's sort of like saying Office is one thing, but Office is not one thing. It's Excel, it's PowerPoint, it's Word, it's Outlook.
right,
So just because I gave it a new name doesn't mean it's one thing. No, there's specialized tools that do specialized things.
exactly. No, 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. And out of curiosity as well, because I come from a marketing background, and you mentioned as well, like a big part of your guys' business model is licensing. I'm always curious, like how are you getting in front of these new enterprises to work with? I assume you guys get a ton of referrals because you really take care of your clients, but are you guys implementing any other kind of strategies like to get in front of the right people?
Yeah, so I think our most successful channel is sort of like education by content marketing.
Mm,
So we write blog posts, we scrutinize all of that. I
yeah.
remember years ago when people are just like, just publish content, just whatever, like chat GPT it and put a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, that's not in me. And the inverse of that is that we recently published a blog post,
Mhm.
and we have a newsletter, and we published in the newsletter. And then one of my customers was telling, hey, that blog post is going around the enterprise. So like somebody read it, somebody liked it, and then he showed me a screenshot of what somebody said, like, hey, we saw this Data Coves thing, and it was a really good thing. What this guy was saying in the, to the main guy that I work with, he's like, this blog post not only confirms what we said, but also expands on what we said. And
Wow.
it took us like 3 weeks or something to get this, and to do our research. And
Mhm.
we don't want to like mislead people or something like that,
Right.
and not be super biased. But the point is like that that level of attention is how we try to get people to build that trust that we know what we're talking about. And I've had people who come to me and say, like, every time we talk, I feel like I learned something new.
Mhm.
And to me, that's good, because it, again, it isn't about the transaction.
Right.
It's about making sure that you're successful.
100%. And I'm glad that you mentioned that as well. I think really focusing on delivering the unscalable value first is huge instead of just trying to automate everything right off the bat or just use chat gpt like you mentioned as well. It's a big reason why I started this
Yeah.
podcast, was to collect these insights about what's working instead of just chat gpting it and throwing spaghetti against the wall, kind of hoping it sticks, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, you'll see that what ends up happening with a lot of companies is,
uh,
if they get a lot of VC money, they have a lot of money to burn, right? So
uh,
now it's like, I'm going to do Google Ads, I'm going to
right.
go to conferences and get a booth, and I'm going to hire a huge sales team.
Yeah.
So their expenses far outdo their revenue.
100%.
And the problem is that they have high customer acquisition, but they also have high churn,
Mhm.
because those people may not have been the right fit, or something like that.
Right.
We have zero, we literally have zero churn,
Wow.
because it's not like we have hundreds and thousands of customers, but at the same time, like,
Mhm.
they feel like we deliver once they come and start using the platform. So again, I'd rather, the way that I tell people is, our
Mhm.
growth is like this. It isn't a hockey stick, but
Mhm.
it's fine. We're bootstrapped.
Nice.
We focus on being profitable over anything else. So like I said, it's the good Italian restaurant. We don't have to have 100 locations around the US, or 1,000 locations to be doing
Right.
well.
I love that. I love that strategy. I kind of take the same strategy as well. And I always have people coming to me knowing that I do marketing, same thing like you mentioned. Oh, we want to run Google ads, or we're thinking about, running Facebook ads, or whatever the case is. I always tell them, in reality, all of the strategies work. Like if you know how to do it the right way, I wouldn't go do paid media and just shoot up my customer acquisition cost before I could get a model that actually fits with my business to work first, even if it's
Exactly.
scalable, if it's a newsletter, whatever the case is. Like, they all work, and you should try to get that one to work first before trying something new. And that's a huge mistake that I see a lot of people make. So huge insights there
Yeah.
from Noel. And
Yeah, yeah, and and I think part of it is because we just don't have the money, so we have to be
creative.
strategic and
Yeah.
creative and um, diligent. It's not like, I'm not going to just throw a bunch of money at
Right.
something without knowing if it's going to work. And so, like you said, first we get the strategy working. Are
Yeah.
we getting conversions from the website? And then we can, on top of that, add Google Ads or anything else.
Scale it at that point. 100%. I
Exactly.
can't tell you how much I see companies making that same mistake. So it sounds like what you guys are doing is definitely working solid for you. I know you kind of mentioned like what your guys' growth curve looks like at this point, and like you guys want to continue to have a specialized service and quote unquote, a good Italian restaurant instead of hundreds of locations. And kind of transition into the next question here. What would you say are some goals for Data Coves in the next 12 months, related to growth? Maybe it's
Mhm.
expanding your team. Maybe it's taking on more clients, or maybe in other aspects as well. Do you guys have any specific goals over the next year?
Yeah, so we've been focusing this year at sort of maturing our processes. So, like, how do we build in more automation?
Mm,
Like, for example, in our CRM, so having sequences set up, and some sort of workflows and that kind of stuff. So before, like you said, it was more manual. Like, somebody asks for some lead pop up, some content, some ebook or something,
mhm.
and we would just manually, like, email it to them.
Yeah,
Again, it wasn't that many, but then at some
sure.
point you're like, okay, now we gotta automate that, and it takes time. And then thinking about, like, well, there's hundreds, well, thousands of people that are in our contacts right now,
Mhm.
and we know not all of them are leads.
Right.
Or, how do we change that and have some sort of nurture campaign? So,
Yep.
because they may not be ready today, but maybe they're ready in 6 months or a year or something like that. But we can't manually follow up with everybody.
Right.
And so, again, doing that kind of stuff. So a lot of it is just maturing how we do things. We're doing some improvements to our website, the layout and the look, and
Yep.
even how we talk about our product. We went from a strategy of like, uh, let's not say too much
Mm.
because I don't know. I felt like if I told you everything, then why do you need to talk to me? Right?
Sure.
If I've already explained everything that you would want to know, if I've answered all your questions,
Yeah.
and so now we're trying, like, okay, let's have sub pages for different parts of our product and talk about them and describe it a little more. Because what was being missed by keeping things to a high level is we miss the flexibility, which is really one of our advantages, is that's why we work well with enterprises, because
Uh,
it's not just a very rigid platform.
mhm.
It's like we start with an opinionated approach, but you can flex it. And because I came from enterprise, we started the product that way. We said, let's solve for complex and then try to make it easy. Where a
Yeah.
lot of products start, let's make it really easy, and
Mhm.
then it's super hard to do the complex.
Right. It's like the reverse, um, like I guess it's a reverse process of scaling, essentially at that point. And it's interesting that you mentioned that as well. I think from my experience, like just providing as much value as I can up front has always worked best because I think people consuming your newsletter and the thousands of contacts you have in your CRM, they might even if you answer all of their questions, they're probably still going to turn around and say, "Hey, Noel, we would rather you just do this for us," because like from my experience,
Mhm.
it's like doing it is one thing, and then doing it right is like a whole different story.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. What we try to do is we can also, we have different approaches to that. So it's like
Mhm.
when we're setting up that foundation, how involved do you want to be? So we've done it where like we do it all,
Uh-huh.
up to like you have a couple of people in your team and we're teaching them and they're building this foundation with us. We also have partners. So another thing that I like to do is recommend people that I can trust. So
Uh-huh.
it's like if I were the one doing this stuff, I
Mhm.
would want to work with these people because they know what they're doing. You'll find a lot of people again who say they know what they're doing, but until you actually work with them, you realize that they don't. Or
Yeah.
if they're a very big consultancy, sometimes they'll send their best people to answer an RFP or to make some sales pitch.
Mhm.
But those aren't the people in your project. So in your project, you're going to get the recent grad or something like that, doesn't have a ton of experience, and again, they've moved on to selling another project, and
Yep.
their goal at that point is just getting done as quickly as possible. So if I had to do 10 things, I'm going to just do 10 things as quickly as possible. I
100%.
don't care after this project is done, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
So that's, there are people who take that approach, and so
Yeah. It really
that helps
sounds
me.
like your approach to how you treat your customers is really just like a partnership, right? Like you're not just focused on that specific time that you're working together, and people really appreciate that. I think like the relationship is really the biggest thing, and that'll pay dividends in the long term, especially. So like you mentioned, even though it might not be a hockey stick at exactly when you want it to, when it comes to growth, it's like you have something that's sustainable and you're building like
Yeah.
solid relationships and partnerships. And I think there's no better way to build a business than that.
Yeah, we've had people who literally like a year later
Mhm.
come back. So like, we've talked and they weren't ready at that time or something like that, and then they're ready, and then it's like, okay, we go. And we've had people where we've lost the deal
Mhm.
because they thought they could do it themselves, and a year later they come back and they're like, okay, now I'm ready. And then they appreciate it, because they've struggled through it. So,
Yeah.
we look at it, yes, it's a marathon, right? It's not a race. Let's just, take our time and do it right.
100%. Yeah, I love that. It's like your business model, it's kind of threefold. Like it's either done for you, it's done with you, and you can help them train their team, or so I love that approach. And
Mhm.
you mentioned that the goal for one of the big goals that you have in the next year is to optimize your guys' process. And I always love to ask this question, like if we were hypothetically speaking, if you could wave a magic wand to fix one thing around that goal and essentially have you reach it like that, do you know kind of what that one thing would be?
I mean, I think one of the challenges that we have as a small company
Uh-huh.
without a huge budget, it's always building awareness, like
Mhm.
that we exist, that we are an option,
Mhm.
that when people are facing these issues with doing analytics well or collaborating across teams or any of that kind of stuff, that they go like, oh, let me talk to these guys because they just may not even hear of us, right? Everybody knows Microsoft, but they don't necessarily, know smaller companies like us. So how do we get in front of these people? Because what we find is if we get to them at the right point in that journey,
Hmm.
they realize that there is a different way. There are people that we come in and they've been talking to multiple vendors because we are packaging multiple things. They may be talking to individual vendors about each piece of the puzzle,
Right.
and we come in and we're like, okay, we help you bring that all together. And by the way, you're missing this other component. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, we weren't thinking about that yet or something. And I'm like, but you're thinking about an architecture, something that you're laying this foundation. You have to think about the whole process
100%.
early on. And if you don't, if you just focus piece by piece, you may not get there. I mean, it's like I'm focusing on buying the wood, on buying the nails, and like, but you need a house, okay? We need to figure out how we're gonna get you in that house, and for that you need utilities, and
Right.
you need, how are you gonna get rid of the waste, and you have to think about, again, this isn't, especially at scale. Like if you're a smaller company, you could kind of grow into this kind of stuff, but we actually help smaller companies set themselves up for growth. So like that's another thing. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, you may be a smaller company, but why shouldn't you work as if you were a big company? It's not that much different.
Right.
And we have customers like that. But what I mean about that is like, imagine you get a house and you're like, okay, well, I just need, I don't know, three circuit breakers or something.
Hmm.
Like, okay, well, that works for today, but when your family grows and you have more outlets and all, okay, now I need a bigger
Right.
thing. And so what are you going to do? Rip this out and bring something in? But if you thought about it,
Yeah.
as a real, people who have done this kind of stuff, they go like, yeah, no, you got to set yourself up to account for those things that will eventually come. And
100%. 100%. I think, yeah, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but you're definitely, you do a great job at simplifying the way your business model works and how it applies to like a lot of the enterprises that you are working with. And I heard a quote,
yeah,
not sure from who, but they always say if you can't explain it at a third grade level, you probably don't really understand like what you're doing and how it applies to who you're going after. So that's definitely
exactly.
huge, man. I think especially after this podcast, if there's anybody that wants to maybe connect with you or they want to check out Data Coves, what would be the best place, obviously, outside of your website, for them to go to connect with you?
So there's a website, obviously, datacoves.com. We also have a LinkedIn page, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. So even, just connecting and following me, you'll see the types of contents that we put out there and we repost. And
Nice.
so people are always learning, like I am connected with other CEOs and other tools, and I follow this space pretty closely. So
Mhm.
I would say LinkedIn is another good way to connect.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to link all of that good stuff in the description of this video. I highly recommend that you guys go check out Data Coves and all of the awesome things that they're doing. But other than that, thank you so much again, Noel, for your insights and for your time today. And we'll catch you guys in the next video.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.